Okay, we're going to get started. So thank you everyone for joining in the mid afternoon, and thank you to our panelists for bringing this all together last minute so we could have this discussion and be able to create something that we could record and circulate through the Just Leadership Alumni Network and also through FIP CFM. And this is going to be available to anyone who wants to get updated on where the Close Rikers campaign is at right now, what's coming up in the immediate future, and what we're continuing to fight for with the movement that we've built collectively in New York City. My name is Brandon Holmes. I'm the New York City campaign coordinator with Just Leadership USA, and I'm joined with several of our panelists who have all been longtime leaders and advocates in this space to close Rikers and to fight for criminal justice reform across the country. We know that the movement is interested in the Close Rikers campaign and the campaign's outcomes, so we're proud that this is an effort led by directly impacted people with a vision to transform justice in New York City and build communities through divesting from the justice systems and investing directly into community support programs and services that really promote public health and public safety outside of law enforcement. I'll be moderating our panel today, which includes first Vidal Guzman, Close Rikers leader and New York City community organizer with Just Leadership USA. Donna Hylton, Jail USA Leading with Conviction 2015 alumna, Close Rikers leader and director of the Women and Girls Project at the Cattell Center for Health, Equity, and Justice. Darren Mack, a longtime Close Rikers leader and just recently Just Leadership USA's Director of Community Engagement and Advocacy. And Kendra Clark, who is joining by phone, Just Leadership USA Leading with Conviction 2018 alumna, Close Rikers leader and one of the steering committee members of the Beyond Rosie's campaign and associate vice president at Exodus Transitional Community, which provides transitional housing for folks who are returning home from incarceration. So thank you to our panelists today. And I'll start it off with asking questions of our panelists, and then we will open it up for a Q&A. So I'll start with Vidal and Darren, Vidal and Donna, I apologize. Two folks who have been engaged in New York City advocacy and all of the criminal justice reform that's been happening across the state for some time. Why does Rikers need to close? Could you speak about the importance of, your leadership and what has happened since the beginning of this campaign? We'll start with Donna, and then we'll go to Vidal.
I was trying to get him to go first. So the importance of why Rikers needs to close, coming from my standpoint, a standpoint of a person who's directly impacted, served 27 years in prison and 13 months of that time on Rikers Island. And we're talking in 1985 and 1986. And this is 2019. Absolutely nothing has changed. We're talking about the culture and an environment that is so riddled with violence and abuse. It doesn't treat women the way women need to be treated. It doesn't focus on health aspects, women, men, anyone, and of course not community. It just stands for violence. It stands for abuse. It stands for so many things that are just cruel and inhumane. And it just needs to, from my standpoint and leadership standpoint, I just want the world to understand that Rikers Island is one of the most horrendous, horrific, cruel and inhumane jails in the world. And it just needs to be shut down as quickly as possible so that we can we can figure out a system that would better represent the people that it likes to incarcerate and also build communities at the same time.
Vidal.
Yeah, so I think a little bit about myself. I was incarcerated 16, 17, tried as an adult at 19, so I was 24. I was solitary confinement for the past two and a half years. So I've been home for 4.5 years on gang parole right now. I used to be a member. I used to be a high-ranking member of the Bloods. And, I think we heard many conversations around urban neighborhoods about, like, what it means to close Rikers. It was first idea of, like, people I always hear about people like, yeah, I've been on Rikers, we need to close Rikers. And then to kind of be a part of the campaign 3 years ago when it first started, hearing people's story and also myself of understanding why Rikers Island was called Torture Island, Gladiator School, experiencing, firsthand of the first week seeing 3 kids back to back hang themselves, and then, the second week being on Rikers Island, understand why they call it Gladiator School, being 16, 17 years old, actually being in there and fighting every single day. There's a certain moment where we always say this, New Yorker advocates always say that there's a Rikers everywhere. And like, just to hear people's story about what exactly it meant to physically, mentally, and spiritually try to survive Rikers is a point where, there was many moments of seeing people die on Rikers and say, advocates saying enough is enough. It's time for advocates who have been the most harmed by the criminal justice system to be at the table to talk about how exactly does it mean to close Rikers, and like, what exactly does it mean to divest and invest in the community. And one of the most important things was our Close Rikers Island, Close Rikers Island campaign that was led by directly impacted people, but with a coalition of, 176 organizations who are faith leaders, grassroots, and social service, and get together and say, hey, it's time as a city, it's time as advocates, it's time as people to step up to the plate and say it's time to close Rikers. But there's a certain moment, as I always say, is that just because someone left Rikers, that doesn't mean that Rikers left them. And, at this point of the reason why we need to close Rikers, it's a tale of 2 cities, but it's also the stain of what exactly it meant and left in our city. To know that we live in the biggest city, that all around the world, they talk about the beauty of being here, but there's another side as something that is just like Rikers Island. So yeah, I think there's a certain point of what exactly it means to close Rikers, but we can't have a stain like that who have took life from us, Black and brown people, to stay open.
Can I jump back in real quick?
Yeah.
Thank you for the, so just listening to Vidal just made me think about me being an adolescent on Rikers Island as well, and the treatment that I received or didn't receive. And so when I first got to Rikers Island, I was in their protective custody, which is solitary confinement, for like 6 months, 7 months. And the treatment that I went through there, and also watching what happened around me. And I have to emphasize what Vidal just said, that I watched people kill themselves. I've watched people be hurt by correction officers, staff. I saw so many things, to be exposed to all that. And it just was horrible. And that's why I got involved, like at the very beginning of this campaign, in its thought process, because it meant a lot to me to be a part of shutting that island down, so we don't continue this pattern of behavior, this culture of violence that exists and persists on Rikers Island, especially, and everyone knows, or most everyone knows, I have to focus on women and girls. We have already been traumatized. We go through so much. I have watched correction officers like come on to young girls, myself included, like to the point of rape. And so this is what happens. This is what it continues to happen. And this is what made me decide to say that I'm a part of this, and I will continue to be a part of this until I see it shut down.
Thank you. I want to move over to Darren. So Darren, what tangibly is the campaign's plan to close Rikers? If you could put it in your own words, what does the whole plan envision in the process of closing Rikers?
Yeah, thank you. So the campaign plan is clear, and it's strategic, and it has a timeline. So like I always like to quote Sun Tzu, the one who wrote the book The Art of War, and he said that tactics without strategy is noise before defeat. So when you go into war, when you organize, you gotta have a strategy. And the strategy, the plan is first and foremost is to shrink the system. Right now, there are 12 jails across the city that had the capacity to incarcerate 15,000 people, 15,000 beds in the carceral system in New York City. So this system, so the plan is to shrink the system from 12 jails across the city to 4 borough-based facilities in the boroughs where people who ultimately will remain incarcerated will have more access to their families, more closer access to to different services and their lawyers and the different programs that they need. So right now, Rikers Island is the last penal colony in the United States. There's no other penal colony. Alcatraz is closed. Darren Mack Island is closed. Rikers, what I like to call the Abu Ghraib of New York City, is the last penal colony in the United States that's isolated. So the plan is to shrink the system, first and foremost. Secondly, to decarcerate. Out of the Closed Rikers campaign came the Free New York campaign, which is a campaign to overhaul our pre-trial judicial system. And it composed of 3 things: bail reform, discovery reform, and speedy trial reform. So we understand that in order to decarcerate people who are held on Rikers Island pre-trial, we need to come up with policies to get them free. So this year, April, we made historic wins on bail reform, discovery law, and speedy trial reform. The bail reform is going to impact almost 9,000 people in New York State. The bail reform is what we have one beginning January 2020. Almost all misdemeanors will no longer be held on bail. Almost all non-violent felony offenses come January 2020 will no longer be held on bail.
You got to clap it up for that.
This is a historic win, and that's going to impact almost 9,000 people in the system. The speedy trial reform, we closed some loopholes on speedy trial, and discovery law, which is the evidence that prosecutors, DAs have against you. Beginning January 2020, they will have to release all evidence against you within 15 days. Within 15 days. This is probably the strongest discovery law reform in the country. So this is going to help get people out of the system much, much faster. This is going to help people who are in the system, who are in the system right now, to not be in the system come January 2020. It's thousands of people in prison, in jails for misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies, and they will no longer be in this. So shrink the system, decarcerate the system, and build communities. Every time, from the beginning, April 2016, when the campaign launched, you see on the banners, you see on the shirts, Closed Rikers, but right underneath that is equally, and I would probably say even more important, is the Build Communities campaign platform. And that includes divestment from the system, not just the Department of Corrections, but also the NYPD budget, together, which amounts to about $7 billion a year. Crime in New York City is at historic lows. And we know that the communities that have been impacted by criminalization and incarceration have been those communities where people come from who are on Rikers Island. And we are demanding, we are organizing and mobilizing to take that budget and divest from it and invest in those communities that have been impacted by Rikers Island, to build those communities so people will be prevented and diverted from going into the system in the first place. And for those who are turning home, will return home to communities that can provide affordable housing, public health, quality education, and all the things that communities need to thrive and strive. So shrink the system is the plan. Decarcerate the system is the plan. And build communities is the plan.
Thank you, Darren. So I want to go to Donna quickly from your experience with Cattell Center. Can you discuss, Darren talked about the progress we made on overhauling our pretrial system in New York. Can you discuss the importance of addressing parole reform as we're fighting to decarcerate New York City and New York State, and how that would impact closing Rikers?
So to piggyback on what Darren just said, our focus to decarcerate as we shut down Rikers Island and just basically make strong changes within the system, like what the criminal justice packet that was just passed. To his point, our campaign, our legislative proposal, actually, less is more, will aid in doing just that. What we're seeing is an increase in people being reincarcerated, not new numbers or committing any new crimes, anything like that, but being reincarcerated. In other words, they're being held on Rikers Island for violating some form of the parole stipulations, which are just simple things that the regular Jane and John Doe would not see as a problem. A person misses curfew, and their curfew standard is 9 o'clock. Some people it's early, it's never later. So if a person is working, and it happened to me, I was almost caught just like that. I was on the train coming home from work. The trains in New York City, you know what happens. Train traffic stalled in the tunnel, whatever it may be. And so I got a call because I was in a space where I was able to get a call, and it was parole officer saying that he was in front of my house, my apartment. Am I inside? No, I wasn't. No, I'm not inside. I am on the train trying to get home. Oh, well, do you know how long? I absolutely have no idea when it's going to be. But if that, exchange didn't happen and he didn't, get me while I was on the train, who knows what could have happened? And this happens every single day. We see an increase in people being detained on Rikers Island for technical violations. At the end of the day, are not technical violations. There are no reason to reincarcerate people. Not just that. We're seeing a lot of people now being reincarcerated for violations that, that really, it's kind of restrictive, and it makes people feel like they have to walk on eggshells, because oftentimes, and the argument with parole officers, their union, that, oh no, they don't do things like that. They just don't violate people for, yes, you do. I had one woman that I was working with strongly. She couldn't report because she was sent to the hospital on emergency, and she had to have emergency surgery. But she couldn't make a phone call, and she had no one to make a phone call to tell parole what had happened and what was going on with her until after the fact. And of course, after the fact, when she was able to get to parole, they held her, they detained her on a violation for not reporting. Instead of just saying, okay, what happened? And understanding that this woman was in the hospital for life and death surgery, emergency surgery. But these are conditions that people face all the time. And so decarcerating, getting less is more passed to help decarcerate, as to Darren's point, as we get Rikers Island closed and we build a stronger criminal justice packet in New York, is necessary. So we have to have parole reform in there as well, parole supervision reform, because we have to start thinking about people that continue to be reincarcerated on these technical violations that make absolutely no sense.
Thank you. Kendra, I want to ask you, as you've joined in on the phone, the Beyond Rosie's campaign has done important work in pushing the city to make specific plans that, as Donna mentioned before, there has to be an emphasis on how we treat women and young girls who are in the system. Can you discuss what the Beyond Rosie's campaign is pushing for, and maybe give us an update on how the city has responded to your plans?
Absolutely. Thanks, Brandon.
Beyond Rosie's 2020, our primary goal is to close the Rose M. Singer Center, which is the female facility on Rikers Island, by the year 2020. And we believe that we can do so through decarceration efforts. Right now, there's currently a little less than 500 women who are incarcerated at Rosie's. We believe we can decarcerate 78% of that number, bringing it down to about 100, 110. So for this new facility, we really see a facility that holds no more than 150 women and is a fully fledged trauma-informed facility. And again, that's for anyone who identifies as a woman. So that's our biggest push, is to get, a standalone site, fully trauma-informed for that number of women, and then we can continue to decarcerate even further. And through those efforts, also other goals are to promote the expansion of alternatives to detention and incarceration programming, and that'll significantly help us reduce the number of women as well. And then obviously to advocate for permanent reinvestment of funds to support decarceration and specifically housing for women. The women's needs are similar to men's, but they're also very unique and different. A lot of women experience trauma at higher rates than men. And then again, due to the lack of housing coming home, we really feel that with more supportive housing, this would help alleviate some of the stressors that women face when they come home. And then as far as, what the campaign's pushing for and how the city's responded, just last year, initially during, with the mayor's plan for these 4 facilities, the women were just going to get a wing on each of the facility. And, it was really through the advocacy efforts of the Beyond Rosie's campaign and all of us on this coalition that really fought to get a standalone site, because if you break down the numbers and it's only 100 women or 150 women and you're splitting them up between 4 facilities, that's like maybe 25 women on a wing of a men's facility. And we know that as women, we already don't get enough programming. We already kind of get the rest of the funding that's left over, as opposed to, really having the most funding and the most programming that we absolutely need. So we know with 25 women on a wing of a men's facility, we will absolutely, there'll be no oversight, it won't be trauma-informed, nonprofits won't be able to actually be able to go in and provide the services due to the lack of funding, because it's going to be really hard to only get funding for 25 women. So through our efforts, we've pushed to secure a standalone site, and right now the site is scheduled to be in Queens, but we are fighting to get the site actually pushed to Manhattan. Right now, with Lincoln Correctional Facility closing on September 1st, we wanted to take that facility over because A, we wouldn't have to go through the ULERT process for it, and B, there would have to be no environmental review process either. So again, with our goal of wanting to close Rosie's by 2020, Lincoln Correctional Facility would allow us to do that, and the space is actually enough for the 110 women that we plan on having in there as well. And so right now, we just did a call to action to Governor Cuomo. We had, the Women's Caucus show up, the Manhattan Bureau President. So we're working with all the different public officials and legislative officials, as well as the community board members from Community Board 10, to really push and advocate for us to get Lincoln as the standalone site. And again, we have backup plans on top of that. If we can't secure Lincoln, we are still looking for a standalone site in Manhattan.
Thank you. Kendra, I want to ask a follow-up question to that.
Sure.
So you say you're also working with Community Board 10, and what we've seen throughout this process in New York City is a lot of community boards are opposed to having anyone who was at Rikers Island or who is formerly incarcerated, right? Having services or programs for folks who are directly impacted in their communities. What has the response been like from Community Board 10, and how have you had any success in advocating for them to center the experience of women and young girls who are directly impacted?
We have had some success. There is not every community board member on Community Board 10 is on board with us, but there are quite a few, and we continue to garner more and more. There were a few that just showed up to our call to action a few weeks ago that weren't on board initially, and then after our call to action, they stood up in the audience and said that they were fully on board, and we've been in contact with them since, and we're going to continue to really educate the community board about the services. It's interesting because in Community Board 10 right there, especially at Lincoln Correctional Facility, the facility is already there. So the community can't necessarily say they don't want people who are incarcerated in their community because they're already there. And I think with women, again, it's really getting them to understand our unique needs and how when you incarcerate a woman, you actually incarcerate the entire community. You incarcerate that whole family, right? You really take her out of that unit and it really impacts that whole support system around them in that community. So I think, again, it's just around education and continuing to do outreach, continuing to invite people to our events, hosting events, and we're really, optimistic that we're going to get this done.
Great, thank you. Vidal, this next question, I wanted to ask you, the Close Rikers campaign is calling for massive investments into ATI, Alternative to Incarceration, and diversion programs. What kind of potential do you see there in New York City if we are able to successfully secure investments in ATI and diversion programs?
Yeah, so right now where we're at, we're like pushing the mayor to, we're pushing the mayor to tell them we need more investments in arrest diversion and turn into incarceration, and to really do this faster. There's already 2 arrest diversion that have been established, and we also know that we need more. The mayor can increase ATI programs, fast enough and completely. The next bold thing I'm about to say is eliminate year sentence in the next few years, and that'll approximately be 900 people less in jail.
Can you explain a little bit more for folks who might not know what the year sentence is?
Yeah, so for a lot of people who are in New York City's, especially on Rikers Island, year sentence might be an individual who might be there for multiple misdemeanors or for not really violent cases. They have people who are in there for a year. And I think for a lot of people who are in there for a year or less, and when I look at that is we know that the cost to keep a person on Rikers Island per year is $300K. And I'm gonna say that again, the cost to keep a person on Rikers Island is $300K per person. And there comes to a certain thinking of what exactly does that mean to fully invest in a different way of what exactly does it mean to keep a person incarcerated. And our Build Community platform really talks about really investing in in a more different way of what it means of landing someone inside or in Rikers Island, but investing in ATIs is what does it look like to make sure that someone does not land into incarceration, that people start looking in a different way to deal with the problem that's in front of them, right? If they're in front of the judge, all right, cool, this person has basic needs, right? We shouldn't be incarcerating them, right? There's a certain point of making sure people's basic needs are being met. There are 3 pillars: having a roof over their head, clothes on their back, and also food on the table, right? So I think there has to be a real important part, and I think ATI really talks about that. This person should not be sent into Rikers, right? This person should get the basic needs and basic help they actually need. Yeah.
Thank you. This is to both Darren and Kendra, and let's start with Kendra since you're on the phone. Can you talk about what kind of cultural changes need to be made and what kind of programs and services need to be available that will transform how New York City's detention facilities operate?
Absolutely. I think, my first talking point always around changing the culture of Rikers in general, and obviously the Rose M. Singer Center, the females facility, is, on the Beyond Rosie's campaign, we are really fighting to get an entirely new staffing structure into place, which really removes DOC from the picture. And at the very most, we will accept 10% DOC officers who are specifically around the perimeter of the buildings, but they're not actually allowed to interact with the incarcerated or detained people. And this is honestly, to me, it's really common sense. I want a job description to meet the root causes of the reasons why people are incarcerated. We wouldn't send our child to a doctor who didn't have a medical degree. Why do we send people to Rikers who have serious mental illness, substance use, trauma, all of these issues, and the staff there that are supposed to help them are security guards, and their job description states that they are security. They are not mental health professionals. They are not, trauma-informed credible messengers or care practitioners. So it's really redefining that staffing structure. What does that look like? And getting the job descriptions to actually match the root causes of the reasons why people are incarcerated. And I think that's going to go a long way to shifting the culture. And I think that we could even be very creative around providing opportunities to correctional officers who want to transition into these other positions. I think that if you are a correctional officer who wanted to get into this business to actually help people, then you would want to maybe do 2 more years of mental health training and actually become a mental health professional. I think that there's, some very creative ways that we can go about that. And then I think my second point, and this is something that we're doing on the Beyond Rosie's campaign, is the actual design of the facility. What does that look like? I do not want cells and bars and people to be really ostracized from one another. We want to create small housing units that consist of like 6 to 8 private rooms with private bathrooms in each of the little housing units, and each unit is going to have its own kitchen, its own dining area, its own laundry, living and study, space for children, and space for their children to spend the entire weekends with their mothers. And then an absolute, nursery that's appropriately staffed for women and newborns, toddlers, and preschool children. Adequate space for counseling, education, vocational programs, family meetings, spiritual guidance. So really creating the facility to look like how it would look if you were not incarcerated. We want it to be as normal as possible to look like an actual housing unit that you would live in out here, so you're not even thinking of it as being almost a jail, right? And looking at it more as like a justice center as opposed to the way that we have punitive jail systems right now. So I think those are 2 of the biggest, points that we talk about when it comes to culture change and staffing. But there's obviously a lot more, but I'll pass it over to Darren. I'm sure he wants to add on.
Basically, summed it up very well. The only thing that I would add is in regards to how the borough-based facilities are designed. So we're going from 12 jails across the city to 4 borough-based facilities. Shrinking. So I believe that we are calling for the city to design these facilities in a way that it could be easily converted. As the population drops, it could easily convert it to other use of spaces instead of to detain someone pre-trial. These spaces could be designed in a way where it's converted to office space for organizations and social services. They could be easily, I believe that they should be designed in that way so it's easily converted, and yeah, that's it.
Designed to be demolished.
Demolished,
Yeah.
as we continue to shrink and decarcerate the system.
Let it be known we are abolitionists at heart, all of us, right?
Yes.
That's our end goal.
Well, this next question, before we get into a little bit more of a rapid fire Q&A, is open to everybody. So we'll start with Vidal, and then you can pass it to whoever you want. But briefly, in 1 sentence or 2, what do you think is the next step for justice systems transformation after Rikers is closed? What are the things that would get New York City's jail population from 3,000 to even lower in the near future?
Yeah, that was 2 questions that needed 4 sentences. But I think making sure that our Build Community platform is well funded in, as Darren talked about the $7 billion. That's a real important part of, when the campaign first started, wasn't not just about closing Rikers, it's about build communities. and really well funding that. And I think the other part is, as Darren spoke about, is like we know that there is going to be people remanded, and we haven't got there to fully organize that people don't get remanded. So our point is like making sure as beds are taken offline, they're taken off forever in these facilities at the mayor's building, and making sure that we're meeting people, 3 pillars, as I said before, clothes on their back, a roof over their head, and food on the table. But like making sure that the 3 parts is also before someone even lands to incarceration, that they're getting the investments they actually need. If they're incarcerated, how do we make sure that they have the blueprints and never return back there? And if they're home, to make sure that they stay in well-funded neighborhoods that prepare them to come home. So yeah, I mean, those are real major parts, but we have to make sure it connects all together. And that's how far we can keep decarcerating more. But yeah. Oh, I was supposed to pass the ball. All right. I don't know. I think whoever wants to jump in.
Let's go with Kendra.
All right.
And I think about this in a couple different ways, right? First, I think about all the different investments that need to be in the community, just like you're talking about the Build Communities platform. And so, ensuring that there are diversion centers in all the communities that are most impacted by incarceration, youth centers, and then also replacing like the NYPD mobile command centers with mental health and substance use mobile centers, or something similar to like the ACT teams that are state funded, but maybe coming up with something for the city that looks like that. And then I think, for me, I'm always talking about when we talk about Beyond Rosie's and we can get this 78% decarceration right now, it's that 22%, the people that have the crimes that, have maybe caused the most harm to others. We need to start having those conversations about what does accountability and transparency look like for that if we really want to truly replace the punitive jail system that we have now. Because that's still going to be the toughest conversation that we have with the community. And it's like, okay, what do we do then when someone has seriously, committed a serious harm to another human being? What can we do as a community? We need more, healing centers and healing circles and different kinds of accountability and transparency, restorative justice practices. So I think that's kind of our next step, or my biggest next step is, okay, to me, it's a little backwards that we're still talking about why people who have serious mental illness and substance use shouldn't be in jail. Like, this is something that should have been done centuries ago, and we could actually now be having a conversation about that 22%. But instead, we're kind of like, behind the curb, still talking about something that it's clear, it's evidence that everybody knows, and research has proven that jail is not the answer, especially for people that have serious mental illness and substance use, yet that's what we do as a society, is still incarcerate them. So I think it's, coming up with that next tough question of accountability for those other folks that commit those serious crimes.
Thank you.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I wanted to, so I agree with, of course, everything that was just said. I always like to focus on the root causes of things. And I think that we need to really figure out a way how that can be done. And one of the ways, or some of the ways that can be done right now, is the reinvestment pieces of it, right? So the reinvestment that's going to happen with bail and all these other things. Our Build Communities campaign, what would that look like? But also like our Less is More campaign as well. There's a reinvestment piece of that as well, because we never look at the communities really so much. We do, but outside doesn't really look at the communities who are most impacted, right? The communities that we come from, that people like to that have been termed these $1 million blocks, right? Why is it termed that way? Because to Vidal's point, 300,000 a year, that's just being detained. What about prison, when the person gets to prison? So we're talking about saving money, in a way that we can reinvest in the communities and focus on the root causes. We have to also understand that poverty in itself is violence. Poverty in itself is violence. So when we talk about violence, we have to look at the many factors, right? The layers about that come with that. And so one of the things that I like to, remind people or just really enlighten people about is that be careful about what you say is violent, right? Because we have this preconceived notion that violent crime means that, oh my God, somebody really caused physical serious damage, if not death, to another person. No, somebody could have just robbed you too. Right, and had a bottle in their hand, and no one's got really hurt, but because you had a bottle in your hand and it had, it's considered a weapon, right? It could be deemed a violent crime. So I mean, all these things we take into account, but to Kendra's point, we don't really need to continue separating the two, because we have to look at why people do things, right? And what we can do beforehand. And it's not out of the ordinary. It's not strange or unheard of to when Kendra described a detained center that was very humane, right? We know there's no such thing as humane prisons or jails or anything like that. But can we have more humane conditions? Absolutely. And how do we know that they exist and can happen? Because if we look at those countries outside of America that have them, that exist already, that means that they could be done. Why can be done? Because in those countries, Norway and the rest, they see the people as themselves. They're looking at themselves. So we need to reimagine that and start looking at those who are considered criminals or whatever you want to say, and just see us as human beings. Me being an impacted person who spent 27 years. I am not a monster, I'm not a criminal, and we need to start doing that. We need to start looking at people in that way so we can see the human being first to get to the root causes of what's going on. That was my piece.
And listen, after that, I don't know what to add. It's, I probably would say, in regards to like, once Rikers is closed and the population we get down a capacity of 3,000 in the borough-based facilities, the next steps we should be tackling is probably two things. One is addressing the mass criminalization of communities of color through broken windows policing. People are still getting arrested for marijuana, jumping turnstiles, and all these, frivolous minor offenses. We need to be tackling that as well as the NYPD budget in order to divest from that system that criminalizes communities of color and invest into those communities that have been historically under-resourced, so we could build those infrastructures to deal with like restorative justice and transformative justice, to actually have affordable housing, to get rid of the poverty that exists in the most wealthiest city in the world. So I think it's twofold: divest, invest. Divest from the carceral system and invest in those communities that's been impacted by mass incarceration.
Thank you all. So, next, our last section, just a few Q&A questions that we've had that I'm going to do my best to place them with who I think is most appropriate to respond to them. And starting out, Donna mentioned abolition. How is this plan rooted in abolition, Donna?
Well, I'll make it personal. I don't want to speak for all of us, even though I know I probably can right now. But it's rooted in abolition because that's what we saw from the beginning. How can we start not just changing a system, because the system, people think like, oh, the system is broken. No, it's not broken. It's working exactly how it was designed to work, right? It has become the response to slavery. We know new Jim Crow. We know that whole talk. We know the language. So what we recognize early is like, we need to get rid of these systems that continue to criminalize us for our very color, for our poverty, our lack of socioeconomic resources, whatever. And the way to do that, we know those of us that spend time, and there's the majority of all of us on this panel right now, but we'll include you, Brandon, know that people are not going to stop committing crimes overnight. Crime is not going to stop overnight. Why? Because we still haven't addressed the root causes of things. No matter what they may be, they're not addressed yet. But we can get to that. We can do two things at one time. Those of us here can talk and chew at the same time. So what does that look like? We're going to decarcerate. We're going to shrink the system down and take the people out of these institutions, these facilities that don't need to be there because they need something else, while we get to abolition. So what that means is, with all these legislations that have been passed, that are in place, and that we want to continue getting passed, that means that we're shrinking the system down so that we have a very minuscule system. So at the end of it all, we can say we no longer need it. Why? Because as we shrink, we're building the communities up to focus on the issues that are not being focused on right now, that are not being resourced, or that are being overlooked. Those communities that are underserved, and which are our communities, and just abolishing the system altogether, because we know the system doesn't need to exist. But before we get rid of a system that is necessary right now, let's be honest, we have to decarcerate as we go along. So my end goal as a person that spent 27 years in prison is to absolutely abolish the entire system. But I'm not stupid enough, and I'm not selfish enough to not understand that my people still need the resources, the opportunities that are not there, still need the help that is not there. But we're figuring it out. So we're not just talking the talk, those of us here, we're walking the walk, because we're talking about decarceration as we're saying we can do this, 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 and this at the same time, and see abolition in the near future.
Thank you. Darren, what did the bail legislation that passed in New York State do to the system of remand? So the system of detaining people without bail. What did the new legislation in New York State do to address that?
So the new legislation that's going to impact all those who have misdemeanor offenses and all those who have nonviolent offenses, most nonviolent offenses and most misdemeanor offenses, is going to basically deter them from being held on bail, number one. For those in regards to remand, judges will have the power, to remand people who have like nonviolent offenses. And one of the things about that we estimate that is going to be approximately about 3,000 people who are going to be held, because this legislation will impact them, not sitting, so judges are going to have that power, people are going to be still held. And in regards to those people who's going to be in a system, Rikers Island is the Abu Ghraib of New York City, but the borough-based facilities are terrible and deteriorating as well. So this is why we say that these facilities also has to go. They have to demolish, because I was actually in a borough-based facility when I was a teenager, and it looks older than Rikers Island. and this is why conditions are so important, because for the people who remain there. If you look back to the Attica Rebellion and looked at their demands, the majority of the demands was about conditions, improving conditions. If you look at the prison strike, the 10 demands from the 2018 prison strike, more than half of the demands is about conditions, because people are going to be remanded. So it's important, that we're going to continue to work to get those people out who are impacted by this legislation, those who are going to be remanded and kept inside the carceral system. We're going to continue to work, but conditions also have to improve. And that's why, people in Brooklyn, when the federal MDC facility, the power went out in the dead of the winter, people was out, the Donna was out there on the front lines, people surrounded the facility. And because the facility was closed, the community was able to respond. So as long as people are in the system, we're going to advocate and demand that conditions improve and work to decarcerate and abolish the system as well.
Thank you. Vidal, he had bled into another one of the Q&A questions we had, that, if you want to share your experience. I know that you were in the Manhattan Tombs. That's another borough-based jail. If you want to share your experience and how it relates to improving conditions, I'll open it up for you.
Yeah, I mean, as a person who was actually in the Tombs when I was 19, 2010, one of the things that I learned about the Tombs is the way that it's shaped, and like how a lot of the times I was actually in there, I was inside the area where I was housed at for 24 hours, and I probably will be out of that place 22 and a half hours when a family members come see me. But the cell was created to not make sure that someone is actually who is detained can look out the window. So I used to have to try to climb on top of the wall to try to look out the window. And I think it's important for a lot of people to know that most of the membership and in the leadership of the Close Rikers Island campaign are people who's going to be left behind on Rikers. So I mean, like, really the improved conditions for people that's going to be remanded is an important part. But as a person who was in the Tombs, 19 years old, I couldn't even look out the window. And I think that's an important part, knowing that the brain doesn't fully develop at 25. So like, what exactly does that does to the mind, and to the smallest thing as lighting, the smallest thing to be in a place where not even be able to look out the window, or not having a place where social service is able to operate. We also know that social service said they was not be able to operate in where the Tombs is actually operating. And as a lot of people know, or some people don't know, that's the Manhattan facility that people go to after, they go from court. So yeah, I mean, there's a certain moment of what exactly does that mean to physically climb a window to look out the window. It's a crucial moment where, as a human being, you physically trying to climb. I'm not trying to be jokeful or whatever about it, but it's like you trying to climb a refrigerator and trying to get your mom's cookies and stuff like that. It didn't feel like that. It felt that as a human being, me being in a place in a cell and physically trying to look out the window just to see how it feels to feel free, it's hard, man. So I think how the tomb is actually created, it's horrible. That smallest thing is not having lighting or having social service to operate, or keeping person detained, or keeping person in a place for 24 hours without any type of space or any place for them to feel lighting hitting them is horrible.
Thank you, Vidal. And we're coming up on time. We have about 3 minutes left. I want to just open, one more Q&A question up to Kendra. Kendra, why can New York City not renovate Rikers Island?
So for several reasons. I think, first of all, it's built over a landfill. And originally Rikers, it was only 90 acres. It's almost or a little over 400 acres now because it's a landfill. Like, it's built over trash, the noxious gases that are being released every day. We have, even outside of people who are detained and incarcerated, there's correctional officers who have retired who now have cancer from working on Rikers their entire career. So I think that's first and foremost, is that just the land is toxic. And if you think about the issues that we have now with the design of Rikers was designed that way, with long corridors, and nothing can be built on top of each other because of the zoning laws, because LaGuardia Airport is right there. So they're never going to be able to build housing units on Rikers that would actually meet the design needs of what we want as advocates, that's actually going to solve some of the violence issues, because design is going to help with that. The long corridors and the blind spots where there's no cameras, that is because of the design of the facility of Rikers. So I think there's several different reasons. Again, also because it's a penal colony and there is only one way to get in and one way to get out. It is not in the community, and as my colleagues earlier were speaking about, with it being so far removed, no one can really know what's going on. So we can't hear people screaming that there's no heat or hot water like we did in Brooklyn, and really have the community rally and advocate for better conditions. So it's the whole gamut of it. It's the space, it's location. You're still going to run into the same issues that you're having with court officials and attorneys trying to go in and visit their clients who have to spend, for a 3-minute or 5-minute question, they have to take the entire day off to get to Rikers. You're still going to have the same problems with families trying to go visit their loved ones and the amount of time it takes to go all the way across the bridge. There's only one bus in, and then you have to go through one facility to another bus to actually get to the facility that you're seeing your person in. So it's a whole gamut of reasons why it's just not possible to renovate Rikers.
Thank you. So it's 3:00 now. I want to thank our panelists, Vidal Guzman, Donna Hylton, Kendra Clark, and Darren Mack. And again, this will be distributed through the FIP-CFM network, the Just Leadership USA Alumni Network, and any other groups that are interested in using this have access to this to understand the priorities and the next steps on both the Close Rikers and Beyond Rosie's campaigns. So thank you all. I'll give you my own round of applause digitally. But thank you all, and have a great evening.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, y'all. Peace.